I probably threw up something that says I'm recording. Just a second, y'all. Hang on a second. Zoom is messing with me. Okay, well, that just won't work tonight. All right, so I'm recording it. I was going to try to live stream it to our Facebook page too, but it wants to be complicated, so we'll just let it be rather than trying to take up a bunch of time. Could you stop doing that? All right, so let's start with the first commandment. So turn with me, if you would, to Exodus 20.
Want us to get our Bibles, I take it.
Yeah, if you would. All right, so Exodus 20. We talked last week about this being one of two places where we find the Ten Commandments. The other is in Deuteronomy. And the reason we find it in Deuteronomy is because that is Moses' recap sermon to the people as he is about to die, because they're about to cross into the promised land and he knows he can't go with them. So he knows he's going to die before they go in. So this is the recap of the Exodus story where they have come out of the land of Egypt. They have found Mount Sinai where God first made contact with Moses, and they are approaching the mountain of God. And like we said last week, there's a lot of stuff happening all at once. There's thunder and lightning and earthquakes and all kinds of stuff. And this huge black cloud has descended on the mountain, and it's burning the mountain, and it'd be enough to scare anybody, right? And suddenly this loud voice starts proclaiming these commandments to the people. Nobody bothers to write them down at the moment because they're all a bit terrified. And so later they send Moses up the mountain to have some more discussions with God and to get these written down, I guess. And when he comes back, of course, he breaks them because, the golden calf thing. And then he has to go back up a second time. Incidentally, when Moses comes back the second time, he spent so much time in God's presence that he glows, and they make him wear a veil over his face for the rest of his days because he's too bright to look on. So, yep. Which will be a useful thing for you to remember in a couple Sundays when we talk about the Transfiguration. But tonight we're going to talk about first, second commandment. So, the first commandment in Exodus 20. Then the Lord spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. All right, so we'll stop there. First thing, you see how verse 2 starts? I am the Lord your God. So in Hebrew, that phrase is Aniko Adonai Elohika. Anikat Adonai Elohika, which literally translates to what it is here, right? I am the Lord your God. When Moses is at the burning bush, he asks God, who should I say sent me to these people, right? And God says, tell them that you were sent by I am. I am the happening one. I am who I am, that kind of thing, right? This is what gets Jesus in trouble, especially in the Gospel of John later on, when they're challenging him and he says before Moses, I am. The reason they get so upset when he says that is because he is taking God's holy name that was revealed in Scripture and claiming himself to be a part of it. And they think immediately that's blasphemy. So now you'll know the next time we cover that particular gospel text. But this is God not just reiterating the name that was given to Moses, okay, which we pronounce as Adonai, even though we don't know how it's actually pronounced. Let me explain that a little bit better. All right, so your screen's about to go white. Hang on a second. Oh, share screen, whiteboard. Share. All right, so everybody's screen should be white now, right? Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. So in Hebrew, God's name is Yod He Vav He. Okay. In Hebrew letters are only consonants. Okay, they don't have vowel letters, and so the way it is in ancient Hebrew, the vowels were understood. Everybody knew what should be there because they were so used to saying it. Now you will see, let's see, do, you'll see these little marks like this underneath. These are vowel points. And they were added much, much later to help the Hebrew language not to die out. Where's my pointer at? There we go. Okay, so we don't know exactly how God's name should be pronounced, okay? Because at some point in history, people figured out that just about everything humans touch, we managed to screw up, okay? And that by having the power to call on God's actual name, we were just besmirching that name, for lack of a better word, right? So when the Hebrew language started to die, they seized on their opportunity to confuse everybody by adding the vowel points for another word in the place of that, okay? So when you see this in the Hebrew text, you'll see vowel points, but they don't make any sense, okay? They can't be for that word. They're actually the vowel points for Adonai, which means Lord in Hebrew, okay? So they intentionally rendered this word unpronounceable. Now you'll see some people say that God's name is Yahweh, some variation of that, right? Or there'll be an H in there somewhere. That is trying to put vowel letters in between these letters and make it pronounceable. We have no idea if that's actually how it's pronounced, nor should we really go out of our way to try to figure it out, right? Because like we say, we would probably mess it up anyway. So this is God's name as revealed in Scripture, right? However it's said. We'll find out when we all get there one day. All right. Let me get my head back on track. Now I'm confused myself. So when God says, I am the Lord your God, God is not just revealing who he is, right, to the people. He's also doing something else. What do you think that is? What does it mean when you hear somebody say, I am the Lord your God? Well, whose God is it?
The Lord our God.
Yeah. He's identifying himself as our God, right? He's saying not just that he's our God, but that he is claiming us as his people. So regardless of all the other people out there in the world, all the groups of people God could have chosen to be God's special people, God chose this ragtag bunch of people serving as slaves in the middle of the Egyptian wilderness and said, I want them. And then took them out into the wilderness to a holy mountain and said, you are my people. I am your God and you are my people. And this is an eternal relationship that will last all the days of your life and all the days of your children's lives and into forever. At no point in your life will I not be the Lord your God. Okay. So, hi, Donna. Can you hear us? Okay. All right. So we're talking about the first and second commandment. We're focused on the first commandment right now, talking about I am the Lord your God. So then God goes on to say, okay, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. Does that sound weird?
Well, they used to have lots and lots of gods, especially in Rome.
Yeah. So, and it wasn't just Rome. So the Egyptians had a whole pantheon of gods, from Osiris to Ra to just all these different ones, right? The Greeks had their pantheon. Basically every civilization was polytheistic, so it had multiple gods. And the lands they were going to, when they got to the land of Canaan, had Canaanite gods and had, gods who were over the harvest and gods who were over fertility and gods who were over this, that, every aspect of the world that people could not firmly control in that day had a God, because obviously there had to be some greater power over it, right? So what God is doing is preparing them for going into the promised land. They're not anywhere close yet. And God knows that they're going to mess up before they get there, and they're going to spend some time wandering the wilderness and having to think deeply about themselves and whatnot. But God is preparing them for what they're going to face, because when they get into the promised land, they're going to be surrounded by these other gods. And the history of Egypt, or the history of Israel, is that time and time again, they fall down and they start worshiping these other gods that are up on the high places. Because, I'll go give my coin to God and thank him for taking our family out of Egypt, but I'm going to go pray to that statue over there and see if I can't get some more wheat to grow in my field, because that'd be great. I need that money. It was a common thing, right? So God is laying out a rule here. It doesn't matter what people say, it doesn't matter what people do. God is a jealous God. He's the only true God. He's the only real God. And so anybody who is trying to get you to pray to other gods is trying to pull you away from the way of God. Does that make sense? Okay. Then he goes on to say, you shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven or above, or that is on the earth below, beneath, or is that in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, so on and so forth. All right, here's where we get a little divergence. Are you aware that there's 3 different versions of the 10 Commandments?
Mhm.
It comes. Go ahead, Judy.
Wasn't it in the book we were reading?
Yeah.
I thought they said that there was more than 10.
Well,
And they
there are
just
more than
died.
10 commandments, obviously. I mean, like Leviticus and Numbers is full of commandments, just as far as the eye can see, right? On every possible aspect of life. But when we talk about the 10 commandments specifically, we say there's at least three different 10 commandments, because different faith traditions number the commandments differently. Okay. So for instance, if you were a Jew, the first commandment is, I am the Lord your God. The second commandment is, you shall have no other gods. That is a standalone commandment. You shall have no other gods. Okay. Then you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember the Sabbath, honor your father and mother, do not kill, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, and do not covet your neighbor's wife. Okay. In Catholic and Lutheran and Orthodox tradition, we number them slightly different. So we say number 1 is, you shall have no other gods, because God is starting out by saying, I'm the Lord your God. That's not a commandment to us. That is a simple statement of fact. Okay, I am the Lord your God. So you shall have no other gods is 1. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of God. You shall remember the Sabbath, honor your father and mother, do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not covet your neighbor's wife. So we split the covet into 2 different ones. Probably because our European traditions have this problem with coveting things, especially if they belong to other people, and, trying to invade them and take them. And it's a bad habit we have. If, however, you are in a different Protestant tradition, like the Reformed Church or the Anglican Church, some Baptist churches, you would have another order. So you shall have no other gods is 1. So that's the same. Second is, you shall make no graven images for yourself. They break that out as a separate commandment. Then you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember the Sabbath, and so on and so forth, right? Here's why I bring this up. Okay, we talked a little bit when we started this study about the history of the Reformation and about the small catechism and that kind of thing, right? And I mentioned kind of in passing that Luther, after he went into hiding to keep from losing his head, eventually had to come out of hiding to keep some of the more radical reformers from destroying the churches themselves, the actual buildings themselves, because they were re-examining everything. And one of the things they started to re-examine was the commandments. And they started to think that have no graven images should be busted out as a separate commandment. And so they took that to heart. And so they started going through all the church buildings that used to be Catholic and had converted over to Lutheran or whatever they were, and started removing the statuary, started removing any paintings, started removing any kind of art, destroying the stained glass windows, just everything you can think of, destroying all images and trying to get rid of music as well. All because they said, this is a commandment that needs to be broken out on its own, and we should have no graven images because it leads to idolatry. When we have them, we start worshiping other things other than God. Okay. We call that iconoclasm. It is the reason that the Orthodox Church does not make statues. In the Orthodox Church, you will see flat paintings. They're actually drawings, or technically you write a icon. So I have a couple in my office. If you ever notice, kind of odd looking, actually. There you go. So this is an icon of the Annunciation. So it's, just technically these are written, not drawn, but it's a very simple, just drawing, right? And it's about a biblical event. There's no texture to it. There's no depth to it. It's just a drawing. In the Eastern Orthodox tradition, that's okay, but nothing else. Okay. Obviously, the Catholic Church thinks differently, and Lutherans fall somewhere in between, depending on the brand of Lutheran you are, because, as we know, we come in a variety of flavors. Just on a side note, when I did the funeral last week for a family that used to be members at St. Michael, they had a lady there who was apparently Missouri Synod, and she came up to me afterwards and demanded that I justify my use of the word saint during the sermon, and also the title of St. Michael Lutheran. It's like, we've always done that. We had saint named Lutheran churches before the Missouri Synod was a thing. They're right down the road in Charleston. St. John's predates the Missouri Synod by 100 years. So, I mean, come on, go away. Yeah. All right. So, because we number the commandments differently, okay, and we have different lists, it puts different emphasis on things, right? So, for Jews, it was very important to testify to the fact that God is our God. And so that was number one. For us, it was more important to say, you shall have no other gods before God. And then the graven images was part of that, because obviously graven images lead you to idolatry if you don't take care. Whereas for other Protestants, it was, you shall have no other gods and do not make graven images, because that was a problem to them. Okay. You see how theology arguments can cause huge divisions in the church? If you go to a Presbyterian church now, most of them do not have stained glass windows. You will not see a whole lot of art. It's just going to be clear windows, very plain, and not a whole lot of frills, because that's how they feel most worshipful. Whereas if you go into a Catholic church, you're going to see sometimes thousands of dollars worth of artwork and all kinds of things. Or for instance, the Eastern Orthodox Church, there's a cathedral up in Colombia that has all the walls covered in icons, and the dome is covered in icons, and it's gorgeous, but it also kind of takes you aback a little bit because it's a little overwhelming at the same time. All because we all have a different understanding of the order of the commandments. Okay. So, questions so far? Are you with me? Am I going too fast? Am I rambling? Because I do that too. Good.
Good.
All right. One of the things that we need to understand when we talk about the first commandment is that its main thrust is to prevent us from falling into idolatry. Okay. The commandment itself talks about graven images, but that's not the only form of idolatry that's possible. Okay. Anything that we give our energy to more than God can become an idol for us. Anything that we put our trust in more than God can become an idol. And we talked about this a little last week. So I'll use myself as an example, okay? As a pastor, it is one of my responsibilities as part of my call to pray, right? That's something that you would want your pastor to do, right? We can all agree on that. However, there are times when I get too busy, okay? I like to set aside time in the morning to do that, but sometimes things happen and I have to move it around, or sometimes I don't at all until later in the day, or there have been days that I couldn't get to it at all, right? There's a difference between having a busy day and accidents where you forget and making a commitment to forget, right? But there's a trend there. If I were to find myself getting where 4 days out of the week, I was forgetting to take time to pray, then I have made at some point a conscious choice that forgetting is okay. Okay. And I'm giving more concentration to something. It might be that building of ours and trying to get it pieced back together. It might be the veterans ministry that we do. It might be any number of really good things. Okay. It doesn't have to be a bad thing that you're suddenly obsessed with. Okay. But I am slowly trying to turn that, whatever it is, into something that I give more attention than God. And that is a violation of the first commandment, because I'm not giving God God's just due. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You can also apply the first commandment to giving, to stewardship, okay? Because God commands us to give of our first fruits. So not the after taxes number, not the after we've paid everything expenses number, but of what we've been given first, because we as a faith understand that everything we've been given does not belong to us. It has been loaned to us by God for the purposes of doing whatever God has called us to do in this world. Okay, it's not ours to keep. It's not ours to do with as we want. It has been loaned to us from God's abundance. Okay. And so if we give as freely as we can, okay, if we try our hardest, and it's not always possible, right? There are times when it's tough. There are times when you don't know how you're going to make ends meet if you do that. Okay. And I think that God well understands that. But when it becomes a habit and you are putting God third or fourth in line when it comes to stewardship, then that is a violation of the first commandment, because you're declaring quite publicly that you value these other things in the world more than what you value God. Okay. It's a hard thing to hear, right? Nobody wants to think that about themselves. But it's true. And it's something that we kind of lightly step around in the church, because anytime we talk about money, suddenly people get upset. I was on internship the last time year C came up and we had Luke. Okay. I've started on internship and I finished at St. Michael. And I got some comments while I was on internship. Why do you keep preaching about money? Why do you keep preaching about, social justice and stuff? And it's like, it's not me. It's the Bible. I didn't write it. Luke is all about social justice and talking about difficult situations and subjects, and money's one of them. And Luke would tell you the same thing I'm saying. So it's not me. Don't get mad at me. Blame Jesus. No. Okay. So getting too busy for God would be a violation of the first commandment. Forgetting to put God first in every aspect of our lives that we're able is a violation. Are there any violations of a commandment that mean you're done? You've messed up too much and that's it? Tammy, you said no. Anybody else? No. Okay. God's not going to cast us aside because we messed up, right? If God ever intended to do that, there would have been no point in Jesus coming to the earth and suffering and dying. Okay. And when Jesus did, Jesus died for the sins of all, not for select sins with a list that was under the cross that had certain exemptions and specifications, right? Okay. So when it comes to the commandments, don't think of them as commandments. Really is a terrible word for them. Okay. Don't think of them as something that you have to do, else God is going to jump out from behind an azalea bush and smite you. Okay, that's not how it is. The commandments are supposed to be the rules that God would want you to follow if you could live an ideal life. If you could live all of these commandments perfectly, then you would live completely in God's favor and righteousness, and everything in your life would be good. Okay. The reality is, in our world, we can't do that. There's too much brokenness, there's too much hurt, there's too much sin. So these are guidelines that we strive for. Even if we can't always hit them, we try. Right? And the reason I make that point is because I don't want you beating yourself up because this week you had to do something, you didn't pray enough times. Okay. It's not supposed to be something to beat you up. It's supposed to be something that gives you guidelines for life and that you come back to see where you're at. Okay. That way, okay, well, I didn't do that this week. I could have done better. Next week, I'll try a little bit harder to do better. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So I'm talking a lot. So questions, comments, concerns, thoughts so far? Lexi has a question. Yes.
How do you follow the commandments with sin around?
Lexi wants to know how you follow the commandments with sin around, which is a good question. You try your best. Okay, you're never going to be perfect, and no one expects you to be perfect, least of all God. Okay, so you just do your best and try your hardest, and then don't get too worked up about whatever you don't manage to hit. Okay. Although I would appreciate if you hold fast to the do not kill commandment, because that one's a little bit harder to get back from, what with society being what it is and whatnot. So yeah, don't kill anything. Okay. All right. All right. So other questions, comments, y'all talk some, because otherwise you could have just watched a video of me talking about this. There is one out there.
There have been days when I don't pray like I should, and it really gets me down. And I realize what I've done to myself.
Yeah. I mean, I think the trick is to find a balance, right? Where we realize that we haven't done it quite the way we wanted to do it, but where we don't like beat ourselves up constantly about it. Okay. We have to have grace with ourselves, just like God has grace for us. Okay. So, it's a good thing to realize that we haven't done it and so to correct our behavior, but not at the expense of our own well-being and beating ourselves up, because then that makes us forget what we learned at the very beginning of the Bible, which is that God has made us in God's image and that we are special to God, right? God doesn't want us beating ourselves up or getting down on ourselves or thinking less of ourselves because we messed up, because we're made in God's image and we're unique, special creations to God. Okay. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Especially you. Hopefully they broke that mold. Other thoughts, questions, comments, concerns? Come on now, I'm not that good of a teacher. Yes, Lexi.
So why did Adam and Eve, why did they just not listen to God anyway?
I don't know why Adam and Eve did what they did.
Pick the fruit off the tree and God told them not to.
Yeah,
But I don't know why they did it. Why they did it.
because they wanted to. How many times have I said, Lexi, don't go do this, and then you went and did it? Yeah. And why'd you do that? Because you wanted to. We think back to when you first started at school, remember? And you went and wandered off that first time, and we said, Lexi, don't ever do that again. And then the next week you went and did it again. Remember that? Yeah.
Let's not go back to that ever again.
So, okay. All right. So if you don't have any questions, we're going to move on to the second commandment. So second commandment is in Exodus 20, starting at, well, it's really only verse 7. They slim down a little bit after the first one. So verse 7, you shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. What do you think that means? What do you think it means?
Trying to think of the way to to word it.
For a piece of
but-
chicken.
I think that you should use the name of the Lord only when you're going to praise him, and not in a derogatory term.
So I agree with praising, right? So we should call on God's name when we want to thank God for something. But what about when we're troubled? Can we use God's name then?
I think so.
Depends.
You're using it in prayer.
You know, I mean, if you look in the Bible, the book of Lamentations and most of the book of Psalms are these prayers of suffering and need and crying out to God, right? So they call on God's name a lot, but they don't have a lot of nice things to say. They often say things like, you know, God, you've done this to me and you've cast me down, and why have you done this to me? And what did I do wrong to you? And it's a book of laments, right? Okay, which I actually find helpful at times because everybody gets angry with God from time to time, right? You know, and it might be something that we don't understand that's making us angry, or it might be something that didn't work out the way we thought it should. It might be insignificant, or it might be major. Like, why did this person die? Right? That's a very common reason to get mad at God. But I think God understands that. And I don't think calling out to God in those times of need and hurt and anger and fear is wrong. I think there's a good tradition of doing that in Scripture. God, why have you done this to me? Even Jesus, God, why have you forsaken me? Okay, which is the nice way of saying, why have you left me up here to die and suffer like this? Why? What did I do? I think the line with the second commandment comes in the way we use God's name, right? Because we've been given power, even if we don't know how to pronounce the Hebrew name that was given. Okay, we still have power to be able to call upon the name of God. Okay, we have power to be able to call on the name of Jesus. We know they exist, so we have power to call on them. If we're calling on them for the wrong reasons, though, like to call down fury on our enemies, you know, that would probably be a violation of the second commandment. You know, if we're going around and just GD this and GD that, and you know, all the stuff we always hear about, don't take the Lord's name in vain. Yeah, so that would be an example of breaking the second commandment. Would cursing?
I would think so.
A lot of churches would argue yes. So saying any of the vast variety of curse words, and believe me, having been in boot camp, I can tell you there's some out there that you don't hear commonly, but they exist. A lot of churches would say that, yeah, if you do that, then you're breaking, or you're not being Christian, right? I would argue that that's trying to make the second commandment bigger than what it is. I don't think God cares what words we use, so long as we're not using them to call on God's name inappropriately. Okay. At the end of the day, they're just words. They may be words that we have socially agreed aren't pleasant for company, but they're just words. You know, and really, in a lot of ways, it's stupid that they're even considered curse words, right? You know, there's some words that should be stigmatized, words that insult people and words that make people lower and that kind of thing. But some of the 4-letter words that we call curse words don't do any of that. They're just adjectives, and it's stupid to even say they're curse words. So I don't think God's going to smite you for saying damn, Okay. I just, believe me, I was, like I said, I was in the Navy. I've said it a lot. I'm still here. So,
Well, I hope not, because I'd be damned.
yeah, well, literally. Um,
Oh, Jenny.
there you go. See what you did there. Yeah, so the emphasis in this commandment is not some high and mighty piousness where we don't say any wrong words and we're prim and proper and all this. It's to keep us thinking about how we're calling on God's name, okay? And to make sure that we're calling on God's name as in the appropriate ways, okay? There's nothing wrong with calling on God for praise. There's nothing wrong with calling on God when we're in times of trouble and hurt and anger and everything else, okay? But we need to make sure that we're calling on God because we need God's attention, right?
Oops,
We're not
sorry.
just randomly using God's name for no reason. Okay. It's about respect, right? Okay. All right. So we've got a few more minutes. So why don't we do the third commandment too? That is in verse 8. So remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien residents in your town. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Okay. So when is the Sabbath day?
Depends on your religion.
So Jews would say Saturday, right?
Mhm.
From sundown on Friday evening until sundown on Saturday evening.
Mhm.
Seventh-day Adventists would agree with that. Christians, a lot of evangelical Christians would say that the Sabbath day is on Sunday. So here's the tradition of the church, and you can do with this what you will. The Sabbath has always been Saturday, okay? Because in the earliest development of the church, when you still had the apostles running about and trying to figure out what to do now that Jesus had ascended to heaven, Acts tells us that the apostles would go to synagogue on Saturdays and observe the commandments and all the things that they normally would do as Jews. Then on Sundays, they would gather in people's houses and they would discuss some of the things that Jesus taught them. And they would have a meal. Eventually, this custom evolves into what we know today as our worship services on Sundays, the Lord's Day, and Holy Communion, okay, based on the Last Supper, right? But the Sabbath has always been Saturday, and Jesus did not redefine what day that was. Christians have just moved their observance of that to another day because it was conflicting with their initial intent to observe the Sabbath as Jews. And it's just kind of an accident of history that it's still like that. Seventh-day Adventists have tried to turn the clock back on that and observe their worship days on Saturdays. There's nothing wrong with it either way. But technically, the Sabbath is a Saturday. Okay. So if it's the Sabbath day, whether you observe it on a Saturday or Sunday, and you go mow the lawn, have you created some hideous commandment breach that's going to doom you to hell?
I don't think so.
It all depends on your interpretation, right? So in Jesus's day, the Pharisees, who were strict interpreters of the law, would have said yes, because they had a Sabbath code that said if your donkey fell in a ditch 10 minutes after sunset on a Friday night, that donkey better stay in that ditch until 10 minutes after sunset on Saturday night. Because if you did anything to try to get it out, you were besmirching the Sabbath. You were doing work, and God didn't want you to do any work.
What if a woman went to labor?
Yeah. What if? She better hold on.
I can tell you that. No, I won't.
Yeah. So Jesus tries to point out these inconsistencies during his ministry, right? Trying to explain to the people that God instituted the Sabbath for the people, not the people for the Sabbath, right? So the point of the Sabbath was always to give us a rest period, a time where we had no other obligations other than to take a break, to recuperate, and to spend some intentional time with God. Okay, that is the point of the Sabbath. And God is the only God in all of history that I'm aware of that has ever mandated that his people have a day off. No other deity has ever cared about that, because every other deity in the history of humanity has always been about being served, not serving. Whereas God loves us and cares for us, and so we serve God as God serves us. It's a mutual relationship. Okay. So the Sabbath is meant for our rest and our break, just as God took the Sabbath for his own rest. Now, we could go down the rabbit hole of whether we believe that creation was done in 7 days. And I think all we're going to end up doing is confusing ourselves, because, unfortunately, Genesis doesn't mention brontosauruses roaming around the Garden of Eden. And we certainly know that their bones exist, so they have to be a thing, right? I think the point of the Genesis story, where God describes creation, is less on it being exactly verbatim, exactly how it's in there, because there's two creation stories in Genesis, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Okay, and they're both a bit different. Humans get created later in Genesis 2. Okay. So it's less about it being exactly the way it's written there, and more about the important theological points, which are that God made the world, God made us, God valued us enough to make us because God wanted relationship with something, and God took a break after everything was made, however that happened and whenever it happened, and whatever restarts might have been necessary when the dinosaurs didn't talk like we do. I don't know. Okay. Does that make sense? Judy, what is it?
No, I'm not going to say anything. I'm glad you said that. I can remember when I was a kid, they had the blue laws up there in Boston. You couldn't go shopping on Sundays.
Yeah. And I remember the end of the blue laws when I was younger, because I remember, when I was younger, nothing was open on Sunday mornings. Nothing. Like church was it, maybe some gas stations, and even that, you never knew which gas station would be open.
Mm-hmm.
And like I remember that the grocery stores used to have these chain mesh nets that would come down over the alcohol section because you couldn't sell it on Sunday. And so they would turn the lights off in the case and put these chain mesh nets over it. It's like,
And the stores would sell just certain things, and they were the emergency items. We'll say like milk or something like that, but you couldn't buy detergent to wash clothes with or something.
Yep.
That wasn't necessary.
Well,
But here in Charleston, you could go to certain stores on Sundays because we have a large Jewish community.
Yeah.
So they were open on Sundays.
Yep.
Oh,
Mhm.
It's just like Chinese restaurants are often open on Christmas because most Chinese are not Christians. So, it's always been one of those interesting things. When Rosie and I first got together, her grandmother especially thought it was like a sin worthy of crucifixion if you wash clothes on Sunday.
Mhm.
Like that was just, you did not do that. And any more than you went fishing. If you went fishing on a Sunday, there was going to be hell to pay. Okay. They didn't hunt on Sundays, and just, and it all comes from these well-meaning but excessive interpretations of what it means to observe the Sabbath. Okay. I would argue that God doesn't care what you do on the Sabbath. And I think Jesus supports this. So long as you are taking care of yourself, you are taking time for yourself, and you are communing with God, because that is what the Sabbath is meant for. Okay. And whether you do that on a Saturday or Sunday or a Friday, sometimes in my case, because that's one of the days I take off, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're taking that gift that God has given you and using it. Okay. It's when you refuse to use it and you drive yourself to the point of exhaustion, both spiritual, mental, physical, that you are breaking the third commandment. Okay. Because then you're not taking care of yourself, this valuable creation that God made. You're not taking that time that God has given you, and you're driving yourself too much. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So all of that is to say, these are the first three commandments, right? Which deal, as we talked about, specifically with our relationship with God. The remaining 7 commandments deal with our relationship with others, specifically family and neighbors, right? As a church community, though, okay, we exist not just to come together and worship, and not just to do mission projects that would be too big for one or two of us to do on our own, but we exist primarily as an accountability group. Okay. That's what God calls us together for, because it is much easier as a group to hold to commandments and the things that God says than it is to do it on our own. Okay. My favorite expression with that, and I'll share this story. So my grandmother used to be a rabid Lutheran. Okay. She was all about it. So much so that when I got baptized, I actually got baptized at Gloria Dei Lutheran in Anna Maria, Florida, because she insisted that my parents bring me to her church to be baptized. Now, ordinarily, most Lutheran pastors would say no, because ecclesiastically, we have to write a baptism down in the register, and that person is a member of the church until they're transferred to whatever church they go to. And a lot of times when we do a baptism, they never tell us where they go. And so we have Christ Community right now, since we inherited pieces, we have some 200 people who were baptized at that church and never appropriately transferred out. And so we know they exist, but we don't know where they are. And we can't just make them disappear. Okay. So normally a pastor would say no, but the pastor agreed. So my parents took me down there and I was baptized there, right? Fast forward 20 years later, my grandma got mad when they called a woman pastor. And so she stopped going to church. She would still go and clean the church as the sexton, passive aggressively, I might add. Okay, but she would not go to worship. And the last conversation I had with her was when I reminded her that the coal removed from the fire is the first to go out. And she has not she has not spoken to me since. Okay. But I'm right. Because when you take yourself away from that accountability and that group mentality, it is a lot easier to fall by the wayside on your own than it is when you're in a group. That's why people who say I'm spiritual but not religious, that's why there's trouble there, okay? And granted, a lot of those people say that because they've been in churches and those churches have hurt them because those churches did not have good theology. They did not think through what the Bible says. They loaded these people up with laws and told them they had to do this, 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 and this to be saved, even though Jesus has already done it all. And they end up hurting those people. But still, if you're not part of a group, it's a lot easier to fall by the wayside and get lost and confused, right? Okay. So hopefully from all this, you're getting this idea of one, the 10 Commandments are not these laws that we must obey, else we perish, right? They are the ideal way that God would like us to live if there was no sin in the world and if we could live ideally. We have proven time and time again that that's not possible. God knows this. That's why Jesus came. Okay. But the 10 Commandments are not meant to beat us up. They're meant to give us a guide for life and help us as a community keep one another on track. Does that make sense? Okay. Does that make them seem a little less threatening?
Mm-hmm.
Because they can be. I mean, Tammy, you say kind of?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, we talked a little bit about how when early Christians would encounter somebody who was literate and who wanted to come to the faith, that they would often give them a copy of the Gospel of John. And that was supposed to bring them to belief in Jesus. And I have said and will continue to say that I think that is the worst possible thing you can do, because the Gospel of John is so out there that if you gave me that and told me this is what we believe, I'd run away from you. Okay, because it's just too mystical for me. The same can be said about the small catechism, though. When you hand somebody the catechism and you have these commandments in there and you don't give them an explanation behind them, they feel like these must-have rules that you have to follow because they're commandments. And if you don't, God is coming for you. And that's not the way we need to understand that, okay? When we talk about the Old Testament, we talk about the law. We have this negative connotation of the law, like the law is just there to get us, right? Just like those cops who are out there doing radar checks. They're just there to get us, okay? But the law is God's good word. It's as full of love and grace as anything that happens in the Gospels. And it's as important to our faith as anything that happens in the Gospels. Okay? People who are, the Jews would tell you that God's law is a gift of love because it shows how much God cares for us. If God didn't care, then we wouldn't have any of this. Okay? God would just let us flap in the wind and do whatever we wanted to. Okay? The law is not a bad thing. It's not an evil thing. It's not trying to trip us up or get us smited. It's there to help us live a better life. We're not going to be perfect, and that's okay. The key is to try, right? Okay. All right, so it's 7:05. Final thoughts, questions, concerns? Good.
I think it was a very good discussion tonight.
Well, I don't know about the discussion part. It was a
Wow.
very good soliloquy on my
Well,
part.
we were discussing, you just didn't hear us.
Oh, that's the silent conversation that gets you.
Right.
So, but yeah, nonetheless, there is a more polished version of this from the first time I did this, because the first time I did the first and second commandments at St. Michael, I forgot to record that session and then had to go and redo it on my own in my office so that people who were supposed to watch online would be able to see it. So I will send a recording video out if you would like to look at that, because my thoughts are less scattered in that video. And I probably say things that I forgot to say tonight. But I probably said things tonight that I forgot to say there. So you get the best of both worlds, or the worst, depending on your point of view.
How do we see the recorded ones that you've done? I missed one.
So if you go to the church, I'll show you. It's easier than telling you. All right, so I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. So if you go online, you go to our church website, which is christcommunitylnc.org. Okay. This is the homepage with our COVID-19 update and all that fun stuff. And it will look a little bit different on a mobile device, but it's pretty similar. Okay. There are two ways to do this. One, you can go to weekly Bible study. And that takes you to this page where there's a couple videos I've got uploaded from our places of encounter study when we were doing it at the church. And also these are some relic small catechism videos from the study at St. Michael that I posted on here just in case anybody wanted to watch. So this would be the easiest place to come see this first and second commandments video.
Okay.
It's right there. You just hit play.
Okay. I had been going into St. Michael's the old way I had, and I had all that there
Yeah.
that you just showed me, but it was not bringing me to.
Yeah. The other thing you can do if you're on the home page is you can go to where it says worship at home right there.
Yeah.
And that's the tab you would go to on a Sunday morning, right?
Right.
Because that's the Sunday worship video and the bulletin. But if you look right here where it says Two Rivers Parish, follow us on YouTube, you can click on that icon.
Oh.
And it will take you to the Two Rivers Parish video page.
Okay.
And then you just click videos here, and this has got everything that we record at both churches. So this is all the worship services, all the midweek services, and you can scroll down and you'll, I mean, we've been doing this for a while, so you'll see right here is the first and second commandments.
Right.
So
I had seen that. I had just never, I should have gone on that. I had seen it, but I didn't realize if I clicked on that, it would have brought me to this.
Yep.
Okay.
That's all the videos that we've done at both churches. With a few except there's a few that I've pulled down for a variety of reasons at different times. So
Very helpful. Thank you.
all right. Any questions? We good?
What's next week?
Next week we will do the third, or we'll do the fourth and fifth commandment, maybe the sixth.
Okay.
We have 3 weeks left before Lent starts. And so I would like to finish out the commandments at least before Lent starts. And then after Lent, we'll pick up with the Apostles' Creed and start back. During the season of Lent, we will have a worship service at both churches for Ash Wednesday. But all the Lenten services will be at St. Michael this year. So the evening service, if you don't want to drive to St. Michael, and I understand why you wouldn't if you're all the way in North Charleston, then you can watch it online. And then when we get into Advent this year, all those services will be at Christ Community. And so people from St. Michael will be invited over. But if they don't want to drive, we should be able to live stream at that point. And God willing, the creek don't rise, be back in the sanctuary, I hope. If we're not, then I may be in jail for arson. One way or another, that building's going to be fixed or gone, one way or the other. So yeah, so we'll have an Ash Wednesday service, and then when we get the Holy Week, I haven't decided exactly how we'll do Holy Week. We may do a Monday, Thursday at each one, and a Good Friday at each one. We probably will not do Easter Vigil at either this year, just because it was a lot for not a whole lot. That makes sense. And it was such a pared down service, so I can do it at both places. A true Easter Vigil service is like a 6-hour service. If we were to use all the readings, it's meant to be an outside service where you literally keep vigil until dawn. And I didn't think anybody was going to show up for that, so I repurposed it. I'd be out there by my lonesome with the fire barrel, and probably Jack would have wandered over across the ditch. So, all right. Any other thoughts, questions, comments, concerns? Okay. All right, then go in peace, serve the Lord. Thanks be to God. And I will see you all Sunday, I hope.
Bye, y'all.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Jean.
Thank you,
Hello.
Pastor.
Yep. Y'all have a good night.
You
Good
too.
night.
Too.